Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Sunday night and time for the fireside, but today I'm going to do something completely and radically different. If you can see up over my shoulder, you can see a wind vane, a weather vane. That weather vane is over top of Carpenters Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I recognize that many of you cannot come with me when I go on tour to these various places around the world. And so tonight, I am piecing together a series of video segments, of course, pre-recorded, to give you the opportunity to come with me to Philadelphia on tour and hear just a few stories and the significance of these places. Brothers and sisters, it's one thing to learn about history. It's another matter entirely and even more enriching to go to the place where that history happened, stand on the ground where it was made, and hear the stories of the people who made it. And so tonight, if you will permit me, and again, it's not going to be professionally done, it's going to be a series of pre-recorded videos pieced together that will be tonight's fireside. So again, I welcome you to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And our story will begin right over my shoulder there at Carpenters Hall. I'm walking up to the marker boards right now here at Carpenters Hall. And the significance of this place right here. Carpenters Hall was built in 1774. Designed and built by the Carpenters Union here in Philadelphia. And you might ask why this building is significant if it was a Carpenters Union Hall. And the answer to that is because in 1774, they allowed the use of this hall for the gathering of the First Continental Congress. Come over here and take a look. It is right here where the very first Continental Congress first assembled. Let me back away. Right up there and right through those doors, past such early American worthies as George Washington, John Jay, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, not Thomas Jefferson, he wasn't here, but also Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams. They went right through those doors. This is the original building, okay? Let me back away. I want you to get a full view of the building. There it is. That's Carpenters Hall. Here's the backstory and why they were here. Beginning in the 1760s, there were tensions that escalated between the British mother country and the American colonies. Part of the reason why is because Great Britain had fought the French and Indian War, and in so doing, they had incurred great debt. And they came up with the solution, the British Parliament, that they would tax the American colonies to pay for that war. Now, that's an oversimplification, but it is the essence of it. So beginning in the 1760s, there were tensions that grew. And then in December of 1773, a group of Bostonians, patriots, in protest against taxation, banded together and dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbor in Boston. It was worth a small fortune. Well, that action angered the British government, and they passed a series of what came to be called the coercive acts, or as the Americans called it, the intolerable acts, to punish Boston. They closed the harbor and basically put Boston under siege, and redcoats took over the town. Now that, mind you, that's only in Boston. The rest of the colonies were relatively unscathed. But each of the colonies formed what was called a committee of correspondence, which was tasked with the responsibility of communicating with the other colonies and preparing for defense if it was necessary. It was led out by Virginia. Then, on September the 6th, 1774, each of the 13 colonies appointed a delegation of men to come here and talk about their grievances. And of the 50 men that were appointed, many of them came. Of the 13 colonies, 12 of them showed up. And they met right here in what would come to be called the First Continental Congress. They gathered on September 6th. They adjourned on October 26th with the commitment that they would come back again. They would reconvene. John Adams gives a very interesting description of what happened when that delegation went through those doors and met for the first time. He described them as fearful, timid, and skittish. Later on, it was discovered as they discussed it that there were some of those men in there who were abjectly opposed to independence. Some wanted reconciliation with England no matter what the cost. Some wanted to go to war against England. In other words, they were divided 3 or 4 different ways. And John Adams said that there was scarcely a man in the room that understood what was really going on. The brink of the precipice, as Adams said it, better than the Virginian Patrick Henry. It was in these walls, right at the second day of the First Continental Congress, when a question became of the most supreme essence to them. Did they vote as colonies, or did they vote as individuals? Who were they representing? Themselves? Their individual colonies? Or something greater? And it was right here in these doors, inside these walls, that Patrick Henry said one of the most, as I see it, significant speeches he ever made. He said, and I paraphrase it because I can't quote it right now, but he said, "Where are your landmarks? Where are the boundaries of your colonies?" He said, "Government no longer exists," meaning your individual governments. He says, "From this point forward, I am no longer a Virginian. I am an American." And it worked. They understood. By the time they adjourned on October 26th, not only had they resolved that they would come back together again, but the first seeds of unity were sown right here. They resolved that Americans had right to life, liberty, and property, notwithstanding what Britain did. They resolved that they would sue for peace from the king, but if not, they would take greater measures. In other words, my dear friends, right here in that significant structure of brick, and through those, out of those doors, came the first vestiges of American liberty. Now, this is what happened in the interim. After the meeting of the First Continental Congress, in April of 1775, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, in which the Americans won a decisive victory against British forces who had gone in with the intent of taking away the Americans' arms. They stood in defense. Now, all of that happened in Massachusetts. But then, less than a month later, well, about a month later, on May the 10th, the Second Continental Congress, according to previous agreement, came right here to the Pennsylvania Statehouse, which is right there over my shoulder. And that is the next piece of history that I will share. That's it, right there. The Pennsylvania Statehouse. That's the original building, otherwise known today as Independence Hall. The great things that happened here in June of 1775, after the American Revolution had already begun. The delegates to the Second Continental Congress met right there in that building. And as part of their deliberations, John Adams and others pushed for a commander-in-chief of the American forces. Now remember, at this point, it's only Massachusetts war. But there were others like Adams and Henry and others that thought that this conflict should be a continental conflict. It should be a war of the United States, not just of Massachusetts. So they sought a commander-in-chief who would come and take over the forces. In June of 75, John Adams nominated George Washington to take that post. He was eminently the most respected military leader in the country, holding the rank of a colonel at the time. Suffice it to say, when the deliberations and discussions about Adams or about Washington began, he slipped out. And when the vote was taken and he was notified of his appointment, he would say, "I beg leave, sir, that it be remembered I do not think myself qualified for this command." But nevertheless, he pledged that he would give his honor and all to the American cause. He passed out of those doors and went up to Boston and assumed command of the American forces. Now, that was June of 1775. A year later, on the 11th of June, Richard Lighthorse Harry Lee, himself a Christian man, as he said it, proposed a resolution that these united colonies are and of a right ought to be free. That was June 11th. On July 3rd, they held a preliminary vote on the subject of independence. During that interim period, Thomas Jefferson had written the Declaration of Independence. It was brought here on July 3rd, and the vote for independence was preliminarily taken, and it was not unanimous. I'll tell that story more detail later, but suffice it to say, on July the 4th, on the morning of July 4th, the delegates convened. It was stormy, dark weather. About noon, a thunderstorm set in, and when Hancock called for the vote on the Declaration of Independence, and when the final votes were counted, it stood 12 colonies in favor of independence and 1 abstaining, New York. That's another story. Effectually, it was a unanimous vote for independence. That happened right there. Now move forward. Throughout the entirety of the American Revolution, it was executed and administered from right there. At the conclusion of the war, it was from there that the first government of the United States, the Articles of Confederation, were drafted. And those Articles of Confederation would stand until 1781. Also, out of that building right there, so many other things happened that were a part of American independence. I got interrupted. So, continuing the story and the narrative from Independence Hall. The Articles of Confederation, I misspoke, stood until 1787. But under that form of government, the United States was falling apart. So they called delegations from each now of the states to come here for the ostensible purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation and forming a more workable government. Now, I don't know if you can see this or not, but right out there in the front of Independence Hall It's a cobblestone street. Now, the cars and the buses that go by right there are noisy enough. But can you imagine iron-tired wagon wheels clattering down that highway? Sometime in April or early May of 1787, city workers came and covered that whole area out there with dirt to muffle the noise. And beginning on the 15th of May, 1787, the delegates, some 56 in number of the different states, passed through those doors into the Pennsylvania Statehouse, now known as Independence Hall, where from May to September, inside that building, by negotiation, threat, coercion, prayer, you name it, they finally, by some miracle, hammered out the Constitution of the United States of America and sent it forth to the states to be ratified. Oh, what a miracle. It was right there. Okay, Independence Hall is right over there. After the formation of the government of the United States in 1791, this building here became significant. This is called Old Congress Hill Hall. The first House of Representatives assembled on that first floor right there. The Senate was on the second floor. What happened here? This is where the first government of the United States was administered. It is right there within those walls. In March of 1793, that George Washington was inaugurated for his second term, and 4 years later that John Adams was inaugurated for his first term. The first peaceful transfer of power. Also, right there within those walls, the Bill of Rights was debated and passed, and eventually went on to ratification, protecting the rights of American citizens, freedom of press, religion, assembly, right to keep and bear arms. That was where all of that happened, right there. First Bank of the United States was created there, and the first mint was created. The first laws and policies of our government came from right there. Okay, Independence Hall is right over there. After the formation of the government of the United States in 1791, this building here became significant. This is called Old Congress Hill Hall. The first House of Representatives assembled on that first floor right there. The Senate was on the second floor. What happened here? This is where the first government of the United States was administered. It is right there within those walls. In March of 1793, that George Washington was inaugurated for his second term, and 4 years later that John Adams was inaugurated for his first term. The first peaceful transfer of power. Also, right there within those walls, the Bill of Rights was debated and passed, and eventually went on to ratification, protecting the rights of American citizens, freedom of press, religion, assembly, right to keep and bear arms. That was where all of that happened, right there. First Bank of the United States was created there, and the first mint was created. The first laws and policies of our government came from right there. Okay, there it is, right there. From 1791 to 1800, the first Supreme Court of the United States was established here. Now, the genius of the framers of the Constitution, which they debated right there, was that there would be three branches of government. And they would be the legislative, which was down there at Carpenters Hall, at Old Congress Hall. And then there would be the legislative, executive, and the judicial. I want to give you some idea of the significance of this area where we stand right there. The government of the United States was created right there in Independence Hall. The first Congress of the United States was right over there and the next building over behind those trees. The independent Supreme Court was in that building of whose weather vane you can see right over there. So there is, over there, the legislative branch, and then the judicial branch, and right over here across the street was the executive. The president's house was right here on the corner of 6th and Market Street. It is there that Washington, the first president, and Adams, the second president, lived until 1800 when the capital was moved to Washington, D.C. As I move forward, the actual foundation of the house is right there under and behind that glass. Now, this is one of the parts of Philadelphia that most aggravates me. But I want you to appreciate that right there is where the government of the United States lived or died, make or break, under the administration of Washington. And it is no small thing to say that he was the father of our country. Indeed, it was here that the decisions that drafted the first cabinet of the United States, that happened right here. It was here that the Judiciary Act was passed that first formed the Supreme Court and the court system of the United States. It was here that neutrality was first implemented as a national policy to keep us out of foreign entanglements. In other words, so many things happened on this corner right here where Adams and Washington lived that established the United States of America. I cannot emphasize enough how significant Washington was to the formation of our country. He was a man of integrity and honor and virtue. And today, none of that is discussed here. None of that's discussed. Okay, guys, I'm standing here on the corner of 7th and Market Streets. And right there in front of you is the Graff House. It was right there between, in June of 1776, that Thomas Jefferson rented an apartment from Graff, a bricklayer, on that second floor. He had an office, study, and apartment right there on that second floor. And it was there for about 17 days in June 1776 on that original site that Thomas Jefferson carved out the words of the Declaration of Independence. You will remember that he had been appointed as part of a committee by the Second Continental Congress. Before the actual vote of independence was taken, he was voted along with four others to be a part of a committee. And of those 5 on that committee, which included Adams and Franklin, Jefferson was appointed to be the man to write the Declaration. And every night, right here behind me in that direction, right over there, in the next block over and down, is the Second Continental Congress. Every night, he would walk about 2 to 3 blocks and come here in June 76, where he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And that Declaration of Independence, my dear friends, represents the American creed. It's the ideal. It's the principles we have tried now for almost 250 years to live up to. But we have yet as a society to achieve those principles. That does not negate the truth of the principles or the power of the document, only that we as a people have not yet measured up to the ideas that were put in print right here. Okay, guys, I'm standing here on the corner of 7th and Market Streets. And right there in front of you is the Graff House. It was right there between, in June of 1776, that Thomas Jefferson rented an apartment from Graff, a bricklayer, on that second floor. He had an office, study, and apartment right there on that second floor. And it was there for about 17 days in June 1776, on that original site that Thomas Jefferson carved out the words of the Declaration of Independence. You will remember that he had been appointed as part of a committee by the Second Continental Congress. Before the actual vote of independence was taken, he was voted along with four others to be a part of a committee. And of those 5 on that committee, which included Adams and Franklin, Jefferson was appointed to be the man to write the Declaration. And every night, right here behind me in that direction, right over there, in the next block over and down, is the Second Continental Congress. Every night, he would walk about 2 to 3 blocks and come here in June 76, where he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And that Declaration of Independence, my dear friends, represents the American creed. It's the ideal. It's the principles we have tried now for almost 250 years to live up to. But we have yet as a society to achieve those principles. That does not negate the truth of the principles or the power of the document, only that we as a people have not yet measured up to the ideas that were put in print right here. And the last thing I wanted to show you for our devotional today is right over there is the Liberty Bell. Right inside that building, right down there on the very end under that glass is the Liberty Bell. So again, your bearings and connection. There's Independence Hall. And there is the Supreme Court building right there. The Liberty Bell is right in there. And back behind on the back side of Independence Hall is where Independence Square is at. And I'm standing here in this public park in front of it, just to the north. Now, I remember the first time I came here, like 3 years ago. And I remember what a sacred and hallowing experience it was to be here. If any of you remember the old movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, well, it was kind of like that for me. It was like the boy from the ranch finally comes to Philadelphia. The boy who'd grown up loving the Constitution and believing in freedom and the happiness of mankind, he finally comes and sees where all of this was started. And I remember the first time I came here. And what a sweet experience it was to go through that building right down there. And what a sweet experience it was to see the Liberty Bell and see that crack. And the statues and the paintings and the stories. But then there was something else that caught my eye that I couldn't help noticing. And it's still here now. This park that's just north is completely overgrown. Hasn't been mowed. In places like right here, it's as tall as a hayfield. Overrun with weeds. The ironwork down there in Independence Hall is rusted. The flower beds are grown over with weeds. The shrubs and the trees are untrimmed. There's garbage, litter, everywhere you look. It really troubles me, guys. As I have said before, if we care about the sacred principles of our American freedom and happiness, then we should also have a reverence for the places where those principles were enshrined, reverenced, and codified. If we stop caring about the principles, then it follows we stop caring about the places. If we want to take American freedom and principles of liberty around the world and convert the world to being a free people, agents unto themselves, then this is the museum. These sites are the museum that teach those principles. The holy ground, the Mount Sinai, as it were, where these principles were revealed and codified. This should be our showcase to the world. Let us care as much about these places as we care about those principles, and take care and protect both. For once they are lost, only blood will buy them back. Good night, and God bless. And right there is the symbol of American freedom, the Liberty Bell, protected under glass, cracked, but still there. Used to hang